Now, most people think, okay, compost, it's very easy. And it really is. Sometimes we overthink it, but most people just say, okay, I'll just cut a bunch of stuff that's dead and throw it in a pile, and that'll be compost. And that's very true. It will be eventually. In my case, when I'm thinking compost, I like to be able to use it as soon as the next season, 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, tops. That's what I'm saying, compost, because eventually everything on the planet will compost. It goes in the forest and it eventually composts. For our purposes, let's talk about compost in 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Cut a bunch of stuff that's dead, throw it in a pile, and it'll become compost. Well, yes, it does. Ideally, you want to get it to a certain temperature. That ideal temperature, about 60 degrees Celsius, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And you do that by getting the stuff that you toss in your compost pile at about a certain ratio. This is where it gets a little down in the weeds geeky. 30-1 by weight, or about 3-1 by volume. If you're going to just eyeball it, I have about 3 times as much of this as I do of that. And the this and that are browns and greens. And it's fairly simple. Browns and greens are fairly simple. Browns and greens are fairly simple. Carbon to nitrogen. Things like fruit cores, 35 carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Dead leaves, 60-1. Straw, 75-1. Sawdust, 325 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Wood chips are 400-1. You can see the ratios. Greens, carbon to nitrogen, same thing, it's the ratio. Grass clippings has 15 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, similar with weeds. Coffee grounds are 20-1. Even though it looks brown, it's really a green. So what does this mean? Well, let's take a look. Early each spring, I take my compost pile and I do a little maintenance. I take the top layer of what appears to me to be organics that is not yet broken down. Take it off. Take all that stuff off the top and get that out of the way. Put it aside. That'll be the beginnings of my new compost pile. Get all of that non-broken down organic material. And then I'm left with a decent layer of rich organic compost. Now, this compost has lots of nutrients in it. It has lots of organic material, and I will use that to fill up my grow bags, mix it with peat to loosen it up, add some perlite or usually peat and perlite or peat and vermiculite, and some of the leftover soil from last year. That rich compost that's broken down is the stuff that I use for next year. So this is early in the spring. That's what this stuff is here that you're looking at. That's been breaking down for almost a full year. Probably 6 months to a year anyway, something like that. Now, that stuff that I shoveled aside, put back into the compost, the good stuff that I kept goes in a wheelbarrow, and as I mentioned, I use peat. Peat from Canada is a very sustainable, harvested in a sustainable way product. It is better for the environment than cocoa coir, which has to come via ship to the U.S. mainland. So I will always choose the more sustainable product and grown a little more locally, the peat. I mix that in to the rich organic compost that I have. 1/3 peat, 1/3 soil from last year's pots, grow bags, and 1/3 so 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat, 1/3 soil. And you can see there's a little bit of vermiculite and whatnot. I will try and take out, if there is something that's obviously not breaking down, I'll try and take any of the little stuff out. as I'm going through. But for the most part, even that's not bad. That organic stuff is great because it actually does hold some water. As long as it's not too excessive. Now, this stuff I'll just take out and put aside, put back in the compost pile. And as I mentioned, this is the stuff that I will now take after I let it get some moisture in it and add it into my grow bags. All right, so just leave it in a pile and it works? Well, if you want to speed it up, you need to get air in there. Aerobic biology will break it down faster than anaerobic, meaning air or no air. So every once in a while, for me, it's about once a week during the spring and summer, I like to flip the pile over. I just take a pitchfork, get in there and dig around, flip it over. I think that's the fastest way to flip it over, get the oxygen into it, let it become aerobic, oxygen eating biology. And that gets the process of the oxygen eating biology, the bacteria in there, will get it to the hot 140 degrees in the center that you're talking about. I do that. If I don't add anything, I probably won't flip it too much. But when I do add stuff, I do flip it. Despite what you've been told, size matters. You can do it in anything. You can really compost in just about any size. A 5-gallon bucket, those plastic tumblers that are only a foot in diameter, but that just won't be fully broken down. It won't get to the hot temperature unless you have a certain minimum size. So the hot temperature really is just to speed up the process. So the ideal size, again, is 3 foot by 3 foot, 1 meter by 1 meter. I use a couple of pallets to make the barriers on the outside. I put some cardboard to keep the small stuff in. There's some holes in the cardboard in the bottom. There's some holes in the sides. Lets a little more air in. And again, you've seen me aerate by flipping it 1 meter by 1 meter. And I will also not only put in the leaves and grass clippings and dead plants, but I will also use some of the soil from my grow bags. And that will bring some biology into the pile already to help break things down. So the bacteria, the fungi, all of that stuff is all part of the process. Again, there's a million recipes. There's a million ways to do it. But I use about 1 meter by 1 meter, 3 foot by 3 foot, and that's pretty much what most people talk about. 1 pallet wide by 1 pallet long, and about a pallet high, but nobody ever gets it that high because as soon as you start putting stuff in, it breaks down and gets smaller. I happen to use cardboard as well, and shred that stuff and break it down. I don't have a lot of grass. What I do have, I don't treat with anything. No fertilizers, no weed killers, nothing. I have my little electric mower that I will use, and I will cut the grass / grind up the leaves and collect my leaves that way. And that stuff all goes into my compost pile. The smaller the bits, the faster things break down. Now, as you can see here, the pile is getting, the bin on the right is getting much fuller. That's because of all fall I've been collecting all the leaves. Cut the grass a few times and cut the leaves. All of that into the compost bin. I alternate back and forth. I will try and avoid any weed seed heads, any weed seed and any flower heads. Try to avoid that in the compost pile. That stuff I will put in a recycle bin, get it off the site. But for the most part, it's plants, the roots and everything, all of that stuff all gets chopped up. Everything at the end of the season gets chopped up into the compost bin. But for the most part, I like to put some of the soil in there and mix it in with the leaves and whatnot, and the clippings and the old vegetable plants, all of that. Mix all the soil, actually helps bring the extra biology and helps to start breaking it down, as well as allowing the roots to get in there and get broken down too. It's sort of my way of also rotating crops, although we don't do that in potted plants. Because it's not the exact same plant going in, you've rotated your crop. So, yeah, it's a mouthful. It's a lot to learn, it's a lot to take in. But don't overthink it. Everything eventually will break down. The stuff I'm talking about is just getting it to break down in a shorter amount of time, in that 3 to 6 months, so I can use it next spring. Um, Sitting here in November, listening to the wind howl outside, I've got nothing to do but time. 3 months, 6 months gets me into 3 months gets me into seed planting, seed sowing, and 6 months gets me into when I plant outside. So the compost, you want it to get hot in order to break down faster. In order to get hot, you need it to be about a 3 foot, 3-4 foot by 3-4 foot, something like that, 1 meter by 1 meter. You need don't overthink the ratios, but about 3 times the volume of brown stuff, which is dead leaves and dead things, sawdust and whatnot, to green stuff, which is coffee grounds and fresh vegetables that you take out of your kitchen scraps and grass clippings. Greens, browns, 3 times the browns to the greens. That's all in terms of volume, about the amount of space. Don't overthink it. Don't weigh things. Don't measure things exactly. It'll all eventually break down. Don't overthink it. You'll get there. And you'll enjoy your fresh organic compost, and it'll be returning all of that stuff back to your own garden. I hope this helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Pass it along if somebody else might enjoy it. Thanks a bunch.